Hi everyone, welcome to Kinesiology 2030, and this lecture is on recognizing overweight and obesity. We're going to be looking at a couple other aspects of Chapter 8 that we haven't looked at. I know we did talk about body composition, ideal weight, weight management. We talked about calories in, calories out. We looked at how to assess body composition and how to evaluate body weight and healthy diets, but we're going to look at a little bit more in detail, which we kind of ended off, and that's about obesity and overweight, especially obesity. And another term that's becoming a little bit more prevalent in health is overfatness, because what's happening, obviously, when we start gaining weight, especially when that weight is fat, we get into different classifications based on the level of overfatness that we are currently at. And we talked about the body mass index and how we can classify people based on that when it comes to obesity. So the first thing we're going to talk about is just a quick review of that healthy body weight and how we assess body weight. So if you remember, when we look at overweight, it is defined as weight greater than expected for a particular height. So everyone has an ideal weight based on their height. Again, individualistic factors will play a role in whether it is accurate or not. But generally in health, we do have, you should be this weight based on this height. But obviously body composition is a better measure of that. But for a large population, we can use the body mass index because they're not overly muscular, and then we can identify the overfatness based on that. So if you remember, the body mass index, when we get into that 25 to 29.9 range, we're considered overweight. And then when we get into greater than 30, we're considered obese. And then what happens from there is we get classed into class 1, 2, or 3 obesity, depending on where we are with the body mass index. So the body mass index generally is a decent measure of obesity because we're talking about people who do not have a large amount of muscle mass. We're essentially just looking at the tissues in terms of the fat storage that has happened with them. And whether it's called obesity or overfatness or extreme overweight, it's all could lead to a lot of health risks and health problems. So we do need to be aware of them and understand how to recognize someone who is at a dangerous level when it comes to their body weight and their body composition. So when it comes to healthy weight, it is a little bit more complex than simple measures. We do need to consider those individual differences, body shape, body composition, body type. We talked about somatotyping, ectomorph, endomorph, mesomorph. Those are obviously going to fluctuate people's weights, so that's going to play a role as well. So I do have a hard time with body weight and classifying people in terms of body weight because it is very individual, and someone could be a very muscular person with 10 pounds of extra fat on them because they've gone through a bulk phase, and they would be put into a high risk of various diseases of civilization, when really that might not be the case because they may just be have a little bit of weight gain because of a program that they went through, and they're probably not at risk in that case. So what you need to determine is which population are you going to use these measures for, and what other factors are you taking into play when looking at it. But the bottom line is obesity is a problem, as we mentioned. We're seeing high percentages of obesity in the United States. We're seeing high percentages of obesity in Canada as well. It's not as high as in Canada as it is in the States, but it definitely could easily get that way per capita if we're not careful. So we need to make sure that we are still advocating for health and promoting physical activity and healthy diet to help people avoid eventually becoming overweight and obese. So when it comes to obesity, obesity is generally, we look at anytime we have excess body fat for an extended period of time in our life, it is associated with higher mortality rates and increased risk of the heart disease, type 2 diabetes, hypertension, some cancers, bone and joint problems, gallstone and liver disease, sleep apnea, and other breathing problems that we talked about in the previous lecture. And when we're obese, the risks of all of these double, if not triple, because of the amount of extra and excess fat that we have, which is causing problems with things like chronic inflammation. And it's basically double or triple that inflammation, which is the reason why we're at higher risks for this if we are obese. There is also mental health challenges that we need to think about when it comes to obesity. I mentioned this before, that when most people who are extremely overweight or obese, they get there for a reason. Usually it's deeper rooting problems, and a lot of the times it's mental health problems as well. And so what happens is, a lot of the times people who are obese, before they got obese, they had body image issues, lower self-esteem, self-doubt, depression, anxiety disorders. They have these mental health issues, and they turn to food trying to help them really cope with those mental health disorders. And most of us probably could relate with that, because even if you think about your own life, there's lots of times when you turn to food for comfort, whether it's you're sad or bored or, just with people and looking for something to do, we tend to involve food with it. So you can see if someone who has a underlying mental health issue, how it could spiral into overeating and eventually lead to obesity. A lot of the times when we talk and we assess people who are obese, we need to get down to that root problem and figure out what exactly is causing the overeating. Because in order to become obese, you obviously have to eat a lot of food. And if you've seen the amount of food that an obese person eats in order to really get that weight, it's an astonishing amount. They eat just so much food, and a lot of it is just sugary foods. And it really is sad to hear their stories, and it gives you really a better understanding of how people are getting to that point in life. And it really doesn't have anything to do with just being lazy or just liking food. It really has deep rooting issues that are causing the problems. So it's just like everything else in life. Everyone has a story, and someone who is suffering from obesity, they have a story, and a lot of the times that story is what caused them to get to that point, and it's usually a mental health challenge that brought them that way. And then when they get to the point where they are overweight or extremely overweight or obese, a lot of the time the mental health, much like the chronic disease part, can double or triple. So they can suffer from these mental health challenges even greater than someone who is not obese or overweight. Now, another thing to look at, which is actually quite concerning, is the overfatness aspect. Now, there's an article called "The Prevalence of Overfat Adults and Children in the U.S." that looks at a survey of children and adults in the United States, and sees a very high percentage of adults and children that have overfatness. Now, they didn't classify any of this as obese or overweight. It was just based on body composition and how many people were not hitting their ideal weight for their height and their age. And what we saw in this survey and this research is that overfatness obviously has been on the rise, and it really looked since 1988 until 2014, and just saw a steady increase for both adults and children in terms of overfatness. And so overfatness is on the rise. It's getting there. It's not going down either, even though we have a better education aspect of it. If you were to look at a survey from 2014 to 2020, you probably would see the numbers are increasing as well. So we're starting to see the numbers are in the high 70s, closing in on 80% of adults in the US that are over fat. And children, we're starting to approach 40% of children in the US that are over fat as well. So just imagine the amount of chronic disease that is running through the United States right now. If we have almost 80% of a population that is at risk for these because of their weight and how much fat they currently have. And then if you think about 40% of children suffering from overfatness as well, they are going to be at risk for these chronic diseases much earlier in life, and that's just going to put a massive strain on the healthcare system in the United States. Another thing to think about and look at too is, and always ask yourself the question, well, why is this happening? Well, we're seeing the overfatness on the rise and overweight and obesity on the rise. But the other thing we're looking at is a small amount of people are meeting one or more of the physical activity guidelines. Now, you can see since 2000, it has the amount of people that have met at least one or more of the physical activity guidelines is steadily risen in that 14-year period. A little bit of a dip in 2014, but you can see really we're only maybe at 50% of a population that is being physically active, and that's just meeting one or more physical activity guidelines. So we don't even really know if they are being active enough. Again, a physical activity guideline could be, are you getting 60 minutes of exercise a day? And that person can click, yes, I get 60 minutes of exercise a day, but it doesn't have that they sit for 8 hours a day as well. So that's something to consider. So we have only half of a population getting enough or, hitting a target in terms of physical activity. And we know that physical activity can actually help us with decreasing the risk of overfatness as well as chronic disease. So it's important to note that, as health advocates, we're seeing people again, just not moving enough, and that is showing in the stats that are out there in research, that there's just not enough people moving enough. There's just not enough people adopting a movement culture and a movement lifestyle, and it's hurting our population. It's hurting a lot of aspects of our society. And we need to make sure as health advocates and health professionals that we try to promote movement culture or movement lifestyle and try and get people more active, but also trying to get people on track with how they eat. Because right now, the biggest concern with food and diet is sugar. We eat way too much sugar in terms of our daily amount. And in our nutritional journal, that was one thing I asked you to be aware of, was how much sugar are you consuming in a day? Because it's important to know that, because if we're having a mass amount of sugar, well, we're just increasing our chance of overfatness. So what's happening right now in terms of why we're seeing high percentage, 80% of people who are overweight, obese, or over fat, is because our diets are just so high in sugar, and we're just having such low physical activity. It's just increasing the amount of excess body fat we have, and it's just, increasing insulin resistance, and it's causing chronic inflammation in our bodies. And all of that is going to lead to cardiometabolic impairment as well as eventually chronic disease. So we need to make sure that we have a better understanding of what sugar is and how to cut sugar out of our diet. And I'm not saying we have to completely cut it out, but we definitely need to follow moderation when it comes to sugar. We want to make sure we're not consuming large amounts of sugar in our day, because for the most part, if we eat too much sugar, we consume too much sugar, it turns into fat. And that's just the simple thing when it comes to sugar. If we can't use the amount of energy that sugar can produce that we eat, then it's just going to store as fat, and it's going to lead to overweight and obese problems. Now, one interesting thing about obesity and overweight and overfatness is the genetic question, because there's a lot of people who say, well, some people are prone to being overweight because it's genetic. But what we have to understand is, why do we think it's genetic, and how can we change then our thoughts and ideals around this? Well, I'm going to be overweight because genetically I'm predisposed to it. So the human body, it may be adapting genetically to excess calories by increasing the number of fat cells in our body. So essentially, it's if we get to a point where we gain some weight, then we're going to increase the amount of fat cells in our body. But again, it comes down to individual variations, because everyone's going to essentially have a certain amount of physical activity. Some people are going to have high or low calorie intake. Some people are going to respond different to hunger and satiety, and some people are going to have more sedentary behaviors. So genetics isn't really going to determine whether we are overweight or not. Again, it's our lifestyle, it's our environment that we're exposed to. And that's where the epigenetic aspect comes into play. So is it genetics or is it epigenetics that we need to understand more? And there's growing research when it comes to epigenetics right now, and what's starting to really begin to be seen is, when it comes to genetics, it's actually very, very complicated, especially when it comes to obesity, because what we're starting to see is it's not so much genetics, but it's gene expression. So genes will control an organism's phenotype, but outside forces can actually switch that gene on and off. So again, the epigenetic part is just that, is the environment that our genes are exposed to are adjusting and really determining what's happening. And when we look at that environment and gene expression, we really can see type 2 diabetes as a prime example of that, because everyone has a genetic code and beta cells and beta genes that are going to control insulin and what our insulin does when we eat sugar and we eat glucose. We all know that when we have a high amount of sugar or high amount of glucose, we have an insulin response that helps with the cellular uptake of that glucose. And if we expose ourselves, so if we expose our body to repeated amounts of high sugar, high glucose foods, and our insulin is going to be spiking up and down, eventually the expression of the gene is going to change, and that's where we see the insulin resistance problem. It's not so much the genetic aspect, and I understand type 1 diabetes is a genetic condition, but type 2 diabetes is not a genetic condition. Some people may be exposed or may be predisposed to type 2 diabetes more than others because of the genetic code, but again, the expression of the gene is still going to be the same regardless of whether you are more predisposed to it. Even if for me, for example, my father is type 2 diabetic, which would put me at a higher risk for type 2 diabetes. So if I were to present myself in an environment where I had lack of physical activity and I had high sugar diet, then chances are, yes, I will get type 2 diabetes a lot easier than someone who isn't predisposed to it. But because of the fact that I am not allowing my genes to be expressed in a way that they're not supposed to, I have not suffered from type 2 diabetes. So my genes, my genetics are still producing insulin the way it is supposed to, because I expose my environment, or my environment is that of physical activity and healthy diet. So a lot of this genetic aspect is really more about epigenetics and what happens when we expose our body to certain lifestyles or certain environments. And with type 2 diabetes, we see that, but we also see it with the opposite, right? So if you are type 2 diabetic, and you're overweight, you're obese, and you become type 2 diabetic, if you change your diet and you're more physically active, guess what the expression of the genes is going to happen? It's going to change, right? So you expose your genes to a different environment, and then all of a sudden your insulin resistance will actually improve. And people who are type 2 diabetes can be cured through diet and exercise because of the gene expression. So anytime anyone, and as health advocates, health professionals, I think this is important to know, that when someone says, I'm genetically predisposed to this condition, you can tell them, well, yes, but if you live a certain lifestyle, you can actually make sure that your genes express what they're supposed to do instead of the epigenetics turning them against you, right? So epigenetics it's a fairly new aspect of health, but it's an important one to understand. It's an important one to know. Now, a lot of the times, personal choices are really what's going to determine overweight, obesity, overfatness, chronic disease, because a lot of the times people, they fail with weight management or losing weight because they're so focused on the energy balance equation. Now, in the weight management, I talked about how it's, calories in, calories out. If we can balance our calories in and we can balance our calories out, then we should be fine. But that's just one small component of it. There is a management process that we need to consider in terms of making sure that we maintain our current weight or lose a certain amount of weight or gain a certain amount of weight, right? We have to understand it's more than just calories in, calories out, right? There's a what, there's a when, there's a where, there's a why, especially when it comes to food. And then, of course, physical activity and sleep are going to play considerable roles in that as well. So it's not just about calories in, calories out. It's about the total aspect of lifestyle. Because I guarantee you, if, you want to lose 10 pounds and it's like, okay, in order for you to lose 10 pounds, you have to have a 2,000 calorie diet. And you have to make sure that you do this, 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 and this on top of that. But, 2,000 calorie diet. Well, I can probably have a 2,000 calorie diet on Twinkies, Ding Dongs, and chocolate bars. And I could eat that every day and reach 2,000 calories. Well, do you think my body is going to be healthy and losing weight if that's what I'm exposing it to daily, is just that type of food? It's more than that, right? It's more than the calories. It's the type of calories. It's making sure that we have good quality calories. It's making sure that our physical activity is quality physical activity. So it's more than just the calories in, calories out. I taught you guys that because it's important to know. It's important to know that if this amount of calories comes in, this amount of calories need to come out in order to maintain weight. Or if you want to gain weight, 2,500 calories extra throughout the week or whatever you want your goal to be. You need to make sure it's quality calories, right? So it's all about the quality, and it's all about doing the entire transformation and the whole lifestyle change, or just making sure lifestyle is conducive to weight management. Now, another part of weight management and making sure that we don't get to the point where we're overweight and obese is understanding things like hunger, appetite, and satiety. So what hunger is the physiological need for food, where appetite is the psychological desire for eating. And then satiety is just when we feel full. We have a sense of satisfaction that we ate enough and a sense of fullness. So hunger and satiety are natural instincts, all right? They are an evolutionary aspect of the human body that helped us understand when we needed to eat and when we didn't need to eat. And somehow we've lost our ability to recognize them. Somewhere in the process, appetite came in and really blurred the hunger and the satiety lines. And it's important to go back and help people realize, what hunger is, what satiety is, and what appetite is. And make sure that I don't want to say that we completely get rid of appetite, because the psychological desire for eating is important because it does help with mental health. And if we can control it and balance it, then it's going to lead to better mental health, because it means we're going to be doing and eating the things that we enjoy. But we have to make sure that we balance it more. And we have to make sure we understand that when we are full, we don't keep eating the food. All right? And then the other role that we need to make sure we completely understand and help people understand is sleep. Because when it comes to hunger and satiety, sleep impacts a couple crucial hormones in terms of hunger and satiety. So those are leptin and ghrelin. And what lack of sleep does is lower levels of leptin and higher the levels of ghrelin. And what that does is leptin is going to help with the satiety feeling, and ghrelin helps with the hunger feeling. So if we have high levels of ghrelin, then we're going to feel hungry. And if we have low levels of leptin, then we're going to not be able to feel full. So sleep will impact how we really react to food. So if we are sleep depriving ourselves, we're actually increasing the risk of gaining weight, because our hormone levels when it comes to hunger and satiety are completely off. So again, everything comes back down to sleep, right? Sleep is so important. Sleep helps us with recovery. It helps us with hunger. It helps us with mental health. So we need to make sure that prioritizing sleep, prioritizing physical activity, prioritizing nutrition, prioritizing mental health are all part of our total life transformation and our total life understanding of how we're going to be healthy. All right, everyone. Thanks so much for listening. If you have any questions, go to the discussion boards, throw them up, and I'll answer them for you. Thanks so much. Talk soon.